So hello everybody, welcome to the panel discussion on the successes. My name is Tomas and I come from the neighboring country Lithuania, and in this gathering I meet like a cousin from a distant country, which everyone is still inviting but nobody likes to seeing anyways. So thank you very much. So I kind of find it a bit ironic that today I'm moderating the panel discussion on the success stories coming from Lithuania myself. So that's why probably the more progressive people don't like to sit close to me and we have a gap here. Thank you, Brian. But I'm very happy that I'm not alone on this endeavor myself today. And today I have along my side three magnificent, wonderful, and just inspiring people. So next to me is Brian Sheehan, who is the Executive Director of Gay and Lesbian Equality Network from Ireland. And he's one of the co-directors of a Yes Equality Marriage referendum campaign, which took place last year. Then the next person is Gabi Calleja, the Executive Director of Gay Rights Movement in Malta. And then I have the last person on the line, but definitely not the least, Lisette, Kampus, an LGBT activist from Estonia. So I promise to be very, very strict moderator today. We are going to proceed in the following way. Each of the presenters will give a presentation not exceeding 15 minutes, thank you. And after all these inspiring speeches, we will proceed to some more free-flowing discussions. I have some prepared questions ready for them, but also we will be more than willing and encouraging you to ask questions and to talk about how we can proceed as a movement towards more comprehensive equality, not only in the separate countries, but also globally in Europe as well. So without taking your time further, let's proceed to Brian with his inspiring presentation on successes in Ireland. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and I'm really thrilled to be here. It seems just a short time ago when we were celebrating our 10th anniversary of GLEN. GLEN is around since 1988, and while there had been a lot to look back on as having achieved on our 10th anniversary, there was still an awful long way to go. And I think, as Thomas has very kindly put it, we did have one of those kind of remarkable, really positive, feel-good moments when we last summer. But I'll talk a little more about that. But first, I'd like you to give 3.4 minutes, that's all I'm using, of my 15 to watch this video on last year's referendum. Thank you. Yeah, oh, there you are.
Matter of hours if Ireland's made history and become the first country in the world to vote for marriage equality. Counting of what will be a record number of votes gets underway at 9 o'clock this morning.
When you're in here today, you will be the face to the world of what's happening on this count centre. There will be people from all over the world here, and there will be people who don't agree with us here. We have to remember the respect and dignity that we brought to this campaign, and we will make sure on the last day of this campaign that respect and dignity will be as real in this room as we made it in every single corner of our capital city.
Members of the public are being invited to witness the results of the referendums at Dublin Castle today. 2,000 people will be able to see the results unfold on a big screen, which will be erected in the courtyard of the castle.
With high turnouts of over 70% reported in some parts of Dublin and other areas of the country when polls closed at 10 o'clock last night, voting in the marriage referendum will reach record levels. By mid-morning, a clear picture of how Ireland has decided on the marriage referendum will be known, with most observers expecting it to have passed comfortably.
Been an amazing social media trend of people all doing their best to make it home and help see this referendum passed.
favour of the proposal, 1,201,607.
Why did you fight so strongly for this, and what does it mean?
I felt our family wasn't recognised as being a family. It is now, and I can't thank the people of Ireland enough for what they did last Friday.
Is it on? Oh, it is. I kind of know the story, and every time I watch that film, I still hope it comes out the right way. Oh, good. It does. We set out at the beginning of this referendum, and Linda's just done it for us. We set out to have a conversation, but we actually set out to make the country cry, and I think we did. And I still, it's funny. The very voice you had at the end was a man called Vivian Cummins, who, with his husband and their foster son, have campaigned for years and years and years to have their marriage in South Africa and their family recognised. And I think Vivian captured the tone and spirit of the referendum so beautifully when his point was, I want to thank the people of Ireland for what they've done. I'll talk a little more about why that mattered and why what Vivian said, in a way, summed up how we won change in Ireland. But I want to just reflect back a little first. It's been a remarkable journey over 22 years. And many of those who were around at the very beginning are still around. Sorry, Linda et al., you're going to be here for a long time yet. But it's sometimes you have to pinch yourself to realize that it was only in 1993 that decriminalization came about, where we got rid of the old Victorian criminalization laws, the ones that are still in force in many African countries. Ireland was a colony, as you know, of Britain for 800 years. So we had to get rid of those laws, and there were many enemies, as in many places, but we managed to do so. And very quickly, with progressive governments, and I think Gabi afterwards will talk about the gains you can make quite quickly with progressive governments, we got very powerful equality and employment equality and goods and services equality legislation in 1998 and 2000. And that again was one of the early countries in Europe to do this. But it's also remarkable that it's literally just 10 years ago that the very first funding came into LGBT organizations that allowed them to work on a national policy level. There was one person working on HIV full-time, and there was a couple of people around the country in community centres. There was nobody anywhere working full-time on those issues. So in a very short space of time, our funder was a funder called Atlantic Philanthropies. They allowed and enabled us to grow, to professionalise, to get the right skill sets, and to have the time. And we used to say our funding gave us 3 days to write a one-page letter. It was that kind of professionalization that we were able to do with funding, and it mattered. And what followed was a sequence of building political capital that allowed us to achieve change. So in 2010 we had civil partnership. It wasn't marriage, it didn't have families in it, but what it was going to do was create marriage-like protections for lesbian and gay couples, which were really urgently needed. And I suppose the key thing about that, and the way we went around it, was to see if we could get every single political party to support it. Every political party in Ireland had some sort of positive work done, from, you know, some to an awful lot across the spectrum. And that turned out to be crucial, getting every political party to support civil partnership, because it meant when we were campaigning onwards for family protections and for marriage, there was a possibility we could get every single political party to support it. And if we could have avoided a culture war. I think Greg talked earlier about the culture war that's in Europe, and I think if you look at America, you would have to say that when George Bush was elected the second time, that marriage and the campaign for marriage certainly was very influential, because they were able to use it as a cultural wedge. You see it again in this election, though it's kind of dying out a little in America. But I think that for us was one of the key goals, not to have a culture war over it. And sometimes that meant compromise that was quite complicated. But actually it created the framework for moving on over time. 2015 was one of those kind of Maltese years where everything comes together in a way that you never imagined. So 2015 was, before the referendum, was equal recognition and protection of lesbian and gay-headed families, including adoption and including assisted human reproduction. It was marriage, obviously, the referendum and the bills that enabled marriage subsequently. And one of the brilliant things that happened was gender recognition legislation was progressing through the Irish Parliament. And there's a phenomenal campaign that's worth studying by TENI, Transgender Equality Network Ireland, who again managed to get every single political party supporting human rights-based gender equality legislation. It's a terrific campaign. But anyway, they weren't able to get anything other than the medical gatekeeper model, is where the government were stuck at. But when the referendum was won at such an astounding number, 62% of the population, the government, within 2 weeks, changed their minds and came in with self-declaration, and Ireland became the 5th country in the world to bring in self-declaration as the model for gender recognition legislation. It's not over, there's more to be done, but those are the foundations, I think, that are crucial, and it's a terrific campaign. But also over the last 10 years, there's been enormous work in non-legislative areas. So in 2015, there was mandatory anti-bullying procedures in every single school, both first level, primary level and second level, which fully integrate homophobic and transphobic bullying and preventive measures for homophobic and transphobic bullying. LGBT people are fully included and funded through the National Suicide Prevention Strategy and all of that work, and belong to another great organisation, the National Young People's Organisation, is again strongly funded by the state to build LGBT young people organisations all across the country. So the progress has been, I mean, it's too slow when you're in the middle of it, but actually if you step back a tiny bit, it's incredibly rapid, and it was built over 20 years. Civil partnership was crucial around marriage for 2 reasons. In the same way as decriminalisation was the benchmark for everything, because it allowed LGB, I suppose, people to be open about who they were. And that they did that increasingly so in their families, in their friendship networks, at work, at school, well, less so at school, but at work and in their communities. And civil partnership did the same for lesbian and gay couples. Lesbian and gay couples in every single part of Ireland had civil partnerships. People called them weddings. There was near weddings, as made no difference. The local papers covered them. So suddenly, for the people of Ireland, marriage didn't seem like something that those gays in Dublin wanted. It actually was something that was of them, of their small and communities all across the country. And one of the most astonishing things in the referendum, which we never thought we'd get, was that every single one of 46 constituencies, bar one, voted yes for marriage. I mean, we never thought that you'd get the Western Seaboard to vote yes, some parts of it. And I think those couples who had civil partnerships and were public about it are the true heroes of the marriage referendum campaign, in the same way as all of those people who came out since 1993 in decriminalisation are in fact the glue that has made the LGBT movement successful, and that's totally true for trans people as well. I won't dwell for too long on the referendum campaign. There is a book out there at the moment, and we will have a website, a fully archived website later on in the year that will have all of the material we have on it. But just to say that there were a number of organisations campaigning for marriage in Ireland. There were 2 LGBT organisations, ourselves in GLEN, and Marriage Equality, that had initially started out around a court case taken by 2 women that was lost on constitutional grounds. But they had taken their course and got a decision actually in 2006. The decision was a negative one, but that 10 years is that kind of journey. So our 2 organisations and the Irish Council for Civil Liberties, the main civil rights organisation, came together to set up Yes Equality as a separate entity that would fight the referendum, and Gráinne Healy, who is the chair of Marriage Equality, and myself co-directed the campaign. But aim was to bring as many people together, LGBT organisations all across the country, but also individuals, civil society groups, employers, anyone and everyone we could find to campaign for the referendum. But I want to pick out just 2 or 3 things about the referendum that I think might be important. And the first is about framing. So if, as we all know from America, if you frame marriage and gains for lesbian and gay people as being about lesbian and gay people, you tend not to win. So look at Prop 8 in California. I think it was $90 million, $45 million in each side, and it was a disaster. And it was a disaster, I think, because people framed the whole conversation about rights for gay people, which is actually, gay people will vote for that, but actually it turns out that not many others will. But if you frame it as something else about the kind of a country, the kind of a society, the kind of people we are, more people engage on that. Now, we had found in our research that young people, those under 40, couldn't understand why anyone would vote no to marriage, and we're all going to do it. However, it turns out they're not voters. We found that women, 40 to 65, strongly support it because they're led by their children. We found men, 40 to 65, the gays can have marriage if they want, but as soon as a no message came in, they went, oh no, they can't have that. So we knew we had to orient our campaign around appealing to middle-aged men and women. Those were the ones who were going to win us the referendum. And how do you package your message? And I don't mean that in a slick marketing, I'm going to sell you a Mars bar way. It's how do you frame what you're looking for in a way that is really important and really relevant to everybody. And our own research said that actually, in an Irish context, what mattered most was equal citizenship. So our constitution said the only people who can get married are a straight couple, but that didn't guarantee equal citizenship to lesbian and gay people. And that was a very powerful argument. This year in 2016, we celebrate the 100th anniversary of the proclamation that founded the state in a rising against the British, the one that was not successful but finally successful in 1916. And in that it talks about cherishing all children of the nation equally. And that became the most powerful argument. And the most powerful people who expressed that argument were parents who said, I have, 4 children. I treat all of my children equally, and yet the state treats one of them as a second-class citizen. That's not good enough for me as a parent. And parents won us this referendum by coming out and saying, do you know what? And even those parents who kind of went, I'm not that sure about marriage, but the value of equal citizenship is much more important. And if I have to go at marriage to give it, then fine. And I think that's what made the campaign accessible. So I think our framing was really important. I think the other piece was tone. You heard it there, and Tiernan Brady is the one who talked about respect. We set out to have a very respectful campaign. We set out to be the family values campaign. We weren't going to give anybody else ownership of family values. We all come from families. We are part of families. We create families. So we weren't ever going to pretend that somebody else owned family values. And that became, again, a very important thing when you merge all of those. And I suppose the best, and again, we kept bearing in mind that we didn't want a culture war. So we weren't out to defeat anybody. So there were going to be people who voted against. There were some who were extreme and have campaigned against every advance for lesbian and gay people, or LGBT people actually. But most didn't. And most people who were going to vote no were going to vote no for 2 reasons. 1, because they didn't like the issue, or 2, because they were frightened into voting no by virtue of what the no campaign were going to say. But we also had to respect their value system. Many were voting no from a value system that was different from ours. That doesn't mean they're bad people. It just means they have a different value system. And we had to keep that quite tight in the campaign so that it didn't become a nasty campaign. And it didn't. This was our first poster. In everything we've done, and certainly in GLEN over 25 years, it has always been one that seeks to bring people along. We never present our wins because they're not gains for us and losses for somebody else. They're gains for Ireland and Irish people. And the reason we've won all those changes that I highlighted briefly earlier was because we really do believe that Irish people are loving, they're equal, they're fair, they're generous, and they're inclusive. It's not a Mars bar slogan. We actually believe it. And because we believe it, this is the kind of message we were sending out. So we were saying to people, we know that if you strip away all of the kind of negative arguments, we know that this is the baseline of what Irish people are. We know that if you're being your better self, this is what you can be. And it's on that basis that we ran a campaign. Now, the campaign itself turned into be the most extraordinary. I'll skip along. Will I? I will. Oh, dear. Two last things I want to talk about. One is we framed the whole campaign as a conversation. Our slogan was, I'm voting yes, ask me why, or can I tell you why? So we didn't lecture people and say you have to vote yes or else you're a horrible homophobe. We said, look, can I tell you why I'm voting yes? And there were eventually 70 yes equality groups across the country, and about 10,000 people a night were out knocking on doorsteps saying to people, I'm voting yes in the marriage referendum, can I tell you why? Now, somebody comes to your door and says that to you. It's an entirely different thing than someone says, vote for me, or vote yes for this, or I'll hate you. And we held open mic nights across the country. We held all kinds of events that actually allowed people to stand up and say, I don't know anything about the arguments, but here's why I'm voting why. My brother is gay. Actually, I have a friend who went to school who was gay, or a person I know I think might have been gay died by suicide. I think it's terrible and we should all vote yes. So we took away the poison of people having to defend every argument. And again, it's allowing people to be their better selves, including politicians. These slides are available. I can make them afterwards. And I'll end with this little story. This is my favourite moment of the campaign. This is Gráinne Healy on your right, who's the co-director of the campaign. And it was the last week of the campaign. You know, at this point the polls looked good. We thought we'd win. I don't think we ever thought we'd win as we did. But we were doing a photo shoot, handing out the 500,000 badge. You know, we got 10,000 badges printed first and thought, how will we ever get rid of those? Nobody uses badges anymore. And we couldn't keep the supply going. So this is our 500,000 badge. And we went down Grafton Street, which is the main shopping street. Gráinne and I had idiot-looking baskets, you know, would you like a badge, would you like a badge? And I saw this man approaching and I said, would you like a badge? And he said, I'd be delighted. And I thought, something about him I like. And I said, would you be interested in taking the 500,000 badge and being photographed for the papers, accepting it? And he paused, looked me in the eye, and he said, I'd be delighted and honoured to do so. And he straightened himself up, fixed his cap, sorted his shirt out, twinkle in his eye, and posed. His name is Vivian Sheehan. He's no relation of mine. He's from the very southwest corner of the country, but has lived in Dublin all his life. His children are all grown up. He was 85, I think. And there was something about that moment, which is that if we'd created a campaign that allowed that man, who would have defied all our presumptions, our valued presumptions that we won't get older people to vote for it, but if we had created a campaign that allowed that really gentle, warm man to be his absolute best self and be really proud doing something that he thought was a really good thing to do, at that moment I thought, okay, I think we've won the campaign. And we did. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Brian, for your outstanding presentation. I think someone has to testify on this, because when you listen to this, it's just too good to be true. I don't think it even happened. So we will proceed now to Gabi from Malta, because when we talk about the Malta, we now usually refer to overnight miracle. So there's another case that might be invented up. So Gabi, please let us know what happened in Malta.
Okay, let's see if I can make this work. There you go. We're not half as nice as the Irish in our strategy. So, but just some context. So Malta is a very small country, as you know, about 400,000 population, predominantly Roman Catholic as far as religion is concerned. We have, well, supposedly multi-party system, but really it's just two main political parties, the Labour Party and the Nationalist Party, which are pretty much centre-left and centre-right. They don't really differ that much from each other in most fields. Tourism is our main industry, so we get around 2,000 2 million visitors a year. We're doing well economically. We have low unemployment rate, one of the highest growth rates within the EU. We have one of the lowest female participation rates in the labor market, but it's going up quite fast. And some important kind of things coming up in terms of for the country where focus is at the moment is obviously Malta having the EU presidency in the first half of 2017. So that's where a lot of the political focus is, and also Malta being one of the European capitals of culture in 2018. So again, that's happening. So we're a very small country, but there's all these people suddenly cropping up. There was a time when MGRM was probably the only organization, and then now you have all these. And, you know, they all have slightly different functions. We are primarily an advocacy and service provider. But, you know, getting everyone to work together is sometimes a struggle. And this is our mission as an organization, which is basically equality for the LGBTIQ community. And we didn't start off as being LGBTIQ. We started off being really LGBT, and then we dropped the T, and then we took it back on, and then, you know, we added on the rest. So it's a process. And this is more or less what we do. We work on legislative stuff, policy, community organizing and empowerment, networking, and capacity building. And basically these are our strategies, so this is what we try to do and how we try to do it. So I thought I'd give a bit of a timeline of how things happened, because it gives a bit of a picture, and then perhaps in the discussion phase I'll go into a little bit more of why I think things happened this way. But Malta actually repealed sodomy laws before Ireland, 20 years before. It wasn't for any LGBTI-friendly reason. It was rumored to be that a judge was being blackmailed, and the Prime Minister decided that the only way he could stop this happening was to repeal sodomy laws. So it's not that the politicians at the time thought, you know, that being gay was okay, but it happened in 1973, and then nothing happened for a very, very long time. And no one talked about gay issues in Malta. There was a huge stigma and a huge taboo. My organization was set up in 2001, so it's our 15th anniversary this year. And then one of the first things that we worked on was campaigning for Malta joining the European Union, for which there was a referendum, which was won, and that introduced kind of the first legal protections under the Employment Framework Directive, but it still took 3 years to get that fully transposed, because they didn't want it to include sexual orientation specifically into this, the legislation. We had the introduction of some gender recognition procedures in 2005. It required irreversible gender reassignment surgery, and quite abusive ways of testing that out, I would say. And then in 2009, as an organization, we brought over Patricia Prenderville, and we did some strategic planning. We felt as an organization we needed to be a little bit more focused and clear about where we wanted to go as a movement. And we drew up our first strategic plan. And one of the first things we did was we drew up sort of a position paper proposing a new gender identity bill for Malta. And that helped kind of to outline what the issues were and where we wanted to go. In 2011, Malta introduced divorce. So, and that was a huge, huge, huge cultural shift. Nothing to do with LGBTI rights, but I don't think any of the the LGBTI rights introduced since then would have happened if that referendum hadn't gone through, because it affected quite strongly the people's perception of the power of the church in Malta. So obviously the church was campaigning against divorce, so was the Prime Minister at the time, and the Nationalist Party in general, but it passed, barely, but it passed. So that sort of changed a little bit the climate, the social climate within the country. In 2011, we finally managed to get the transposition of the Freedom of Movement Directive. There was a clause in Maltese law that referred to Maltese family policy. So for family reunification purposes, same-sex couples weren't considered eligible, for example. And then in 2012, we published a position paper on marriage equality. And again, these papers were very useful for us because whenever we met with a politician, we were able to say, these are our arguments, this is what we want, and this is why. So they were a very useful tool. And then in 2012, the government, again, it was still the Nationalist Party, came up with a cohabitation bill which granted very, very minimal rights to same-sex couples. And we had a sort of an internal discussion, which we then extended to the broader gay community, and the consensus was that this wasn't nearly enough and was a little bit insulting. So we decided to not endorse the bill. So it eventually fell through. It didn't even get tabled in Parliament. And then also in 2012, Joanne Kassar, who's a trans woman, who had been fighting since 2007. She had undergone gender confirmation surgery, gone through the legal recognition process, but then wasn't granted the right to marry. So on the basis that the government only didn't really recognize her as a woman, but you know, the government said they only provided her with documentation saying she's a woman in order to avoid her embarrassment. So she went through the whole Maltese legal process, 3 different courts, and ended up in the European Court of Human Rights. And then the big moment, the 2013 national elections, which were won by the Labour Party, and there was a huge kind of pre-electoral effort, in a sense, to put LGBTI issues on the table. Not really I at the time, mostly LGBT, I have to say. What we did is we tend to do this every election, is we draw up our sort of requests, demands, expectations, our own manifesto, so to speak, and we send it out to all the political parties, and we ask them what they would commit to in the legislature. And then we basically disseminate them to the community and say this is what each political party is saying they are going to do in terms of LGBTIQ rights within the next 5 years. And LGBTI issues did become kind of, you know, one of the main issues talked about by both parties to a certain extent, but a lot more by the Labour Party, and in particular by the Labour Party leader. So that, again, raised visibility quite a bit. You know, we didn't really know if they really meant it or if they were just saying it, but we were hopeful. And the first thing that the Labour Party did, really just within a month of gaining power, was they reached a settlement with Joanne Kassar, the trans woman. So, and then introduced an amendment to the legislation stating that gender recognition was effective in all spheres of life, including marriage. So that was kind of the first concrete step that was taken. The next step was that it became clear that sort of LGBT issues will be one of the main focus areas for civil liberties. In the country, we actually have a Minister for Civil Liberties, and she attended the Idaho Forum that was held in The Hague in 2013, which again for Malta was, quite extraordinary. And I think all the other ministers were quite surprised to have her there. And then shortly after that, the government within the Ministry for Civil Liberties established the LGBTIQ Consultative Council, which is basically representatives from all those working on LGBTIQ issues in some way. So it's not necessarily specifically LGBTIQ organizations, but for example, the equality department in the largest trade union in Malta. All right, if they are in any way addressing LGBTIQ issues in their work, then they're entitled to be represented on the council. And the council works on, generally, it started off working on sort of tasks that the minister mandates. So the first task the minister mandated the council to work on was the Civil Union Act. The council includes a lawyer. And the first draft of this bill was drawn up, and we decided we wanted to go, well, short of marriage equality, we wanted a law that didn't create and recreate all the articles within marriage, but simply a simple statement that says civil union at par with marriage. So anything, basically, it was a very simple law. It stated anything applying to marriage also applied to civil union, including parenting rights, including second parent adoption, third party adoption, single parent adoption was already possible. And that went through. Again, the Labour Party backed that position of having basically marriage without the word marriage. The Prime Minister managed to keep his parliamentary group to go along with this bill. And there was, huge celebration when this bill passed. And then at the same time as passing the Civil Union Act, there was probably just as an important bill that was passed, although we're yet to see the effects of it. But there were also amendments to the Maltese Constitution introducing the grounds of sexual orientation and gender identity as protected grounds of discrimination. So really the highest level of legal protection that we could have. And then a few other kind of bits and bobs around important, but we didn't even know they were happening. We just sort of were informed, oh, this minister did this, and we said, oh, wow, that's good. One was to include gender reassignment, time off, kind of, within sick leave, so to make it eligible for sick leave purposes. And the other was to introduce gender identity as a ground for application for refugee status. And we have had trans people who have gained refugee status on that ground. And then 2014, we hosted the Idaho Forum, and then again, October 2014, we had the first anti-bullying policy making specific reference to homophobic and transphobic, biphobic bullying. It is supposed to mandate schools to set up school development plans that specifically address that issue. Implementation and monitoring is probably not as organized as in Ireland, but it's still a good tool to have. And then 2015 was the Gender Identity, Gender Expression and Sex Characteristics Act, which in my opinion was a much more difficult law to get through. Basically because everyone can understand what civil union is about, two people getting together, they love each other, etc., etc. But gender identity and intersex issues are not issues that people tend to talk about very much and are very familiar with, and they can be very technical. But because there was quite a backlash on the Nationalist Party, who abstained from supporting the civil union, even from within their party, they felt they couldn't really oppose very much the next sort of LGBTI-related piece of legislation, because that would, forever lose any chance of regaining or reclaiming their LGBTIQ voting support. So that went through relatively, I would say, relatively simply. And then shortly following that, another policy, education policy, was launched around treatment of and how schools should deal with transgender variant and intersex students in schools. And so that provided general guidelines to schools, because we've had now quite a number of children and young people who are coming out while still students. And there's been quite, in general, a positive response to that policy, also from many educators. And then in also July of last year, the government adopted an LGBTIQ action plan. So basically, we, as a consultative council, we drafted up kind of targets we wanted the government and different ministries to implement. So issues related to health, to education, to family, etc. And we met with each individual minister to ensure that they were committed and on board with those proposals, and then they were adopted not as a consultative council proposal, but literally it was the government saying this is what we want to do and what we commit to do in the next 2 years. So that's where we are at. Actually, yesterday there was also a pronouncement by the Prime Minister that he would be in favor of marriage equality, and following that, shortly after, there was a statement by the leader of the opposition that since civil unions in any case grants the same and exact rights as marriage, then, it's a non-issue. And so it seems there's agreement. So we're hoping that we were kind of thinking that marriage equality was something for after the next election, which will happen at the end of next year, but who knows? We might actually get it before then. And these are the things that are currently ongoing. So we currently have in layman's terms, being referred to as a law against conversion therapies or practices, which we're calling Affirmation of Sexual Orientation, Gender Identity and Gender Expression Act. So there's quite a bit of debate around that happening in the country, also because the Catholic Church came up with a position paper against the bill. We have an Equality Act also going through the parliamentary process, which will introduce anti-discrimination measures for all grounds at equal level, also in the provision of goods and services. So sort of that would also be quite a big thing, and also to establish a human rights commission in accordance with Paris principles, so falling directly under Parliament and not under any specific ministry. We're working on a policy on the treatment of trans inmates. We're reviewing treatment protocols for intersex persons, which is part of the GGSECA Act, as we call it, but hasn't happened yet. And there's also a review process of Malta's Embryo Protection Act, which criminalizes sperm and egg donation. You can't donate sperm in Malta. And so some other commitments that we hope to be working on are these. I think I've exceeded my time limit. There you go.
Well, what's going on? It's like a little competition. Oh, we are good. No, we are better. And actually, it's very interesting to know that Malta has climbed on the ILGA Europe Rainbow map next year on the first place. So now officially it's the best place for LGBT people to live in Europe. So thank God that we don't have people from UK here, because there would be a cat fight. But now I would like to give the floor to Lisette and present a little bit closer to flesh situation in Estonia.
Yes, do I need to use this microphone, or can I
No,
use...
you can use that one.
Perfect. Ooh. Hello. So first of all, when I realized that the title of this panel is From Zero to Hero, and then that I would be sitting in a panel with Malta and Ireland, and then I figured, well, Estonia has gone in 10 years from 0 to 0.1, actually. But hey, so let's see. Because the thing is, I remember pretty much the time like 10 years ago when Gabi and I and very many other people sitting here today, when we started to work, or were working already with LGBT issues in Europe, all around Europe. And I think in a way we all chose the same kind of strategies, which meant the kind of old usual strategies. First, you get the public to know that gay people are there, that we exist, that we are not freaks. Some of us are, and that's also okay. And then second, to introduce pride parades, all sorts of pride events. And then to kind of get to some sort of position where we can ask for some sort of legal recognition and some sort of progress in that matter. Now, we've all used similar tools, and so those tools have worked better somewhere and not so good in some other places. In terms of Estonia, we did, of course, try to use the tool of pride parades also. I believe it was 2004, and there was a lovely old Swedish guy called Bill who came to us and he said, no, just do some cultural event. Just do something very, very easy, very, open to public. Just get people together, enjoy, have a nice time, get together, have some talks and stuff like that. To which we thought, that's a great idea. And so we did that. In 2005, we already thought, well, let's make it bigger. Let's go to the streets. But as many people from this region of Europe know, coming to the streets is not something which is popular amongst Eastern Europeans, I should say. And so when we did the first few Pride Parade events, then indeed we were able to succeed in the sense that we were able to introduce the public to the fact that indeed also in 1.3 million you do have gay people. That these gay people are brave enough to come to the streets and walk the streets and show themselves. And so what we managed to achieve was that this topic was finally brought up in a public level. First, public debates began to take place. First, politicians started to take this issue up. So we kind of, step one was completed. Now what happened next? Well, now it's getting a bit tricky to talk about it, because it's the first time actually that I'm talking about this to a group of activists, and also I see Council of Europe here. Is there anybody from the Commission or Parliament? So after 2006, I believe, or 7, when we started to talk more with the politicians about possible legislation and how to achieve that this legislation would be brought forward and the Parliament would debate it. Then a few Estonian activists made a strategic agreement with a few Estonian very strategic political, how should I say, grey cardinals, the ones behind the curtains. And in 2008, from 2008, we decided as an agreement with the Estonian strategists that Estonia would no longer hold pride parades, and in return, we would get the legislation. So this was an agreement, a secret agreement. Let me now just get a sip of water. Because as many of you from this room also remember, Estonia took quite a heat for this decision all around Europe. We lost funding from Amnesty. We took some heat in organizations such as ILGA Europe, ILGA World as well, because it was very, very not understandable to these organizations why on earth would you not be using a tool which is universal all around the world? Why would you stop using this tool which has worked and has brought us success? So to this we had, and at this point we also really believed in these arguments, and so here I am today to apologize for that actually. But we believed really that in terms of Eastern Europe, maybe the strategy would be more successful if we would really cooperate with the politicians in very high level, which can be done if you come from a small country. Now, so we held up to our end of the deal, and as you all know, Estonia hasn't had a Pride parade since 2008. 2009, 2010, we started to get first real discussions amongst ministries, amongst ministers, amongst government officials and so on and so forth. The first real text for legislation was brought forward and it was discussed. So we felt that, okay, this kind of compromise might have paid off and we might be able to get to the point where we get the law and then we can, of course, go back to Pride parades. But so in 2014, the government changed in Estonia, and that gave us a window of opportunity which hadn't presented itself over the years so far. And so at that point, I think really in Estonia, a group of people, because in Estonia we don't have LGBT organizations per se, we do have individuals who then every now and then come together and work together. And in 2014, I think we were able to gather quite a good group of people, politicians, policymakers, activists, opinion leaders, whatnot, and sort of come together and really come up with an action plan how to push forward with this legislation now that we really finally had in hand, thanks to Imre also, who is here today. So what we try to do is we build as wide coalitions as possible. We try to keep the LGBT activists out of the public eye in a way that they wouldn't do much of the talking and instead have let's say, allies do the talking for us. And as you mentioned, I believe the idea was to frame this issue not as an issue of equal treatment as such, but as an issue of fundamental values and also as an issue of how Estonia is perceived outside Estonia itself. I believe this time in 2014 and the work that we did was immensely successful in the sense that we were able to gain quite a good majority in the parliament to get the legislation introduced and debated in the parliament floor in the first place. And in the end of 2015, the cohabitation law, which is open for everybody, was adopted. However, today, a year later, is it a year later? Yeah, it is a year later. Yeah. However, today the situation is following. On paper, it looks awesome. Really, really good. It's a cohabitation bill, open to everybody. It's supposed to have adoption in family and outside family, all of these things. It kind of looks like Estonia in general. Estonia looks really awesome on paper, but when you dig deeper, then you see that maybe Excel charts are not so realistic after all. But so now we are in a situation where the law has been adopted partially. The parliament changed in the meantime, so the parliament that accepted the first part of the legislation is now no longer. We have a new parliament, and this parliament is supposed to accept the implementation acts of this cohabitation law, which is essentially these acts which make the law implementable. So, regardless of the fact that starting from January 1st this year, the law became into effect, there is no single couple in Estonia who can use the law. So far, I believe 13 cohabitation agreements have been formed by the notaries. I know of 4 families who have started already the processes of strategic litigation against the against the state of Estonia. I have no idea about the timeline when the second half of this law will be debated in the parliament, how it will pass. Fact is that it won't pass in a way that is really needed for the community. So this means that regardless of how it's passed, people will have to go to court. It is up to the parliament how easy or how hard they make it for the Estonian people who pay for their salaries to go to the court. So in this sense, it looks as a success, but actually it's kind of a success-ish thing, which we have no idea yet still how it's gonna end up. But so here we are today, yes, and I would like to end my contribution to begin in this panel by saying that I think when you have a society where basically everybody is ready, really everybody is ready, and then you need a very strong political leadership. And as long as you do not have this strong political leadership, nothing will ever change. And as long as you keep on waiting for this political leadership to appear, you will stay waiting, which is why I say screw the political leadership if it's not happening and go back to the streets, really. Thank you.
So I don't know even where to begin here. First of all, Lisette, thanks for ruining my party. So now it's not the panel on success stories, but the success stories and others. But just to make clear about the cooperation which is going among the Baltic states, because you know that we have a thing going on which is called the Baltic Pride, and it's kind of a unique framework in Europe where our parades rotate and not happening every year in each country, but 1 year is in Vilnius, 1 year in Tallinn, and 1 year in Estonia, in Riga. And we had this internal disagreements as well, you know, because Latvia and Lithuania chose a way of proceeding with the actual march, and we saw in Riga last year how it develops and how it builds up. And Estonia has always proposed this idea of different version, you know, of more of a cultural Baltic Pride festival without the actual march. And when we thought like, if that works for them, they have the full right to execute it the way they see it fit, because they know their reality is much better than we do. So I have to admit that today I heard a very different version of a story, of Estonian story, and we are really looking forward to coming to that March for Equality in Tallinn in what? 2017. So maybe now let's proceed with some flowing questions, which I will table to my panelists to discuss the stories a bit more in depth, and then I will invite the members of the audience to come up with the questions themselves, which you have a floor of tabling afterwards. So maybe the first question regarding the Irish context. And it's actually very interesting to note that homosexuality was decriminalized in Ireland roughly at the same time as in the Baltic states, because Estonia and Latvia got it in '92 and Lithuania got it exactly at the same time in '93 as Ireland. And it's very interesting to note how the stories, the national developments went completely in a different directions. And while Irish people voting yes in marriage equality, and I emphasize it, marriage equality referendum, where Latvians and Lithuanians still consider any LGBT positive information as propaganda. So the question would be like, Brian, do you think there is any kind of emerging European consensus towards LGBT equality that we are moving forward, or is it just really like the national stories and national developments and basically we're left on our own, or there is something more comprehensive going on in Europe right now? Also taking into account this backlash which Gregory presented.
What's it one of the Russian activists said is that he doesn't necessarily mind, Igor Yasin, he doesn't necessarily mind the attacks because it means that you're got on an agenda at some point. I think, like, there's any number of answers to that, I suppose, and if I had a magic looking glass, I could tell whether it was a positive or negative progression. But I suppose I'm a glass half full person, and I think it is a positive trend, certainly in Europe. I think we're going to need national parliaments to drive it. I don't necessarily think the EU has the capacity right now to drive forward the change we need. We see European, like since the Lisbon Treaty, the Commission, the Parliament aren't necessarily figuring out how to drive forward change, and we've become, in part, or maybe in whole, a Europe about an economy. But I think that creates both opportunities and challenges for us about, to use some of the words we've all used here, about framing. And I think one of the issues from an Irish context is that we started out Celtic tiger, I think you've all heard of it. It was very fleeting, and it's now rapidly endangered. In fact, it's a dead species. But in the time of Celtic tiger, so we got the Prime Minister to launch our strategic plan in 1992, in 2006, and it was called Building Sustainable Change, and the image was all of cranes and new buildings and no rainbows, but it was all this kind of modern Ireland progress and so on, because we were trying to tie what we wanted to a vision of a country that was important externally. And there's various economic theories that say that if your country is open to the LGBT people, that we're the canaries in the coal mine. It's indicative of a positive approach in the country, and you'll attract inward investment and so on. And for all of us in small countries, that is a really important political priority. And then we had the recession, we've had 7 years of austerity. So we kind of switched tack and talked about diversity powering economic recovery. And it was about those kind of arguments. So I think one of the challenges for us is, how do we move our arguments from just being about a social Europe, which is very true, into how do you make it about the broader concerns about Europe? And that is, it's an economy at the moment, and I think we have to figure out how do we tie those in a much more robust format that makes it harder for national political elites and indeed the European political elite itself to ignore us. But then the other one is around migration, and I think we haven't figured out how to do that, and I don't think Europe has as well. So I'm not sure is the simple answer.
Very nice answer. Very comprehensive one. Thank you, Brian. Now the question to Gabi. So Malta seems to be an extremely tiny country, and actually, like, the airport occupies quite a bit of the island itself. And I believe that in Maltese society is characterized by the phenomenon that everyone knows everyone, at least a little bit. So could you say that this interconnectedness of the communities have impacted the progress towards LGBT rights? And if yes, maybe how this experience could be transferred to other not-so-big countries, such as the Baltic states?
Well, Malta is a small country. It's not just a perception. It actually is small. Not everyone knows everybody, but really the degrees of separation are not very, very large. So I think one of the main factors is, even when governments weren't supportive, we still had access to politicians. And by access, I mean we'd send an email and ask for a meeting, and we would be granted that meeting. Now, we could go and spend half an hour in a discussion with a minister and never hear the word gay coming out of their mouth, and they'd be nod and be very understanding, and we wouldn't absolutely get anything out of that meeting, but at least we were we were talking to them. So being a small country means you have easier access to people in power. And that's mostly because in Malta, every vote counts in a literal sense. The elections, the general elections in 2008 were won by a margin of 1,500 votes. Can you imagine? So that's what's really once sort of what they call the gay lobby. That's what they call us, the gay lobby. Suddenly was perceived as a group, a minority that could actually swing an election. That's what made them listen. So in a way, we became, a tool. This is what could get us into power. So it's not necessarily that, the Labour Party leader at the time was fully convinced and committed to LGBTIQ equality. There was some gain being perceived. We thought this was a win-win situation. So, they get what they're after, and possibly we get what we're after. As far as society is concerned, in Malta, it's a bit different from Eastern Europe, I think, because we have the same stigmas and the same homophobia and transphobia, but the way it's manifested is possibly a little bit different. So when we started off with Pride in 2004, it was a very, very, very small event, not even 100 people, and half of them were straight people. But there was no violence, there was no fear of violence. It was, very much a political event. It was reported in the media because it was, the first ever gay pride event with gay people in showing their face. But and that tends to be the case. The homophobia is sort of always underlying everything, and most of that is also due to our religious culture, which is embedded in everything, from the national holidays to feasts to how people interact to what they believe, etc. So, but what I think has happened is that where originally, when MGRM was founded, it was really just 2 or 3 people talking about LGBT issues. They were the only voices out there. What slowly started to happen was that even on online newspapers, for example, the comments underneath articles, more and more members of the community started to speak out. And so even if they weren't willing to be on TV or on radio, but it was more than one voice. And then that slowly built up to the perception that, there's, more than that crazy, annoying Gabi speaking out. It's really a community of individuals.
No, Gabi, you're very, very nice, and we really like you talking. Just keep going. Thank you very much for your answer. So now coming back to the Estonian realities. So despite the fact, Lisette, that you described the implementation of a cohabitation bill, as I understand, as a very challenging process, it has to be noted and taken into account that your parliament actually voted in favor of it. And it was very interesting to see for us, Lithuanians and I suppose Latvians, that Estonia was, after this development, Estonia was branding itself in the PR section as the first ex-USSR country to advance on LGBT equality. And I know that it's very problematic comparison as such in itself, but it was there, and I think it really got viral. So my question would be, do you think that difference which we have between Lithuania and Latvia and Estonia is conditioned upon different religious affiliation, your closeness to Finland and like the Uno-Figuric language group, or is there something else?
As you actually just said, Estonia branded the adoption of the law as something, very, very progressive to the outside world, right? Doesn't this prove exactly the point that I mentioned earlier? Estonia looks awesome on paper. So in this sense, yes, we branded it as a huge success, and in a way it was, because, you know, like, at least it's half a mountain, right? Sorry, what was the other half of the question?
So my assumption was that still Estonia is a bit more advanced than other Baltic states, and what's the reason behind it?
Gotcha, sorry. So yes, in the sense, Estonia is, yes, very, very not religious. I think maybe 10 to 15% of population consider themselves religious. And also mostly it would be the Russian-speaking minority. And so yes, in this sense, obviously it has been very much easier for us because we haven't had this strong church opposition and strong church lobby against us. During the recent years, however, of course, as we've seen all over Europe, you have like some movements which get funded from, I believe it's via Poland, but these are Catholic funds, these are funds from Russia, and so on and so forth. And so these movements have become active now. But truth be told, I don't think that in Estonia actually really anybody takes them very seriously. They are vocal, that's true, and as a result of this kind of very polarizing debate, a very neo-Nazi, no, I shouldn't say neo-Nazi because they are a Nazi party. Nazi party got into the Estonian parliament with, I think, 6 seats. Is it 6 or 7? Growing. Shit. But well, you know.
Please mind your language.
So you know, in this sense, you can see this impact that it's starting to have an impact. But all the more, I think, important then is to build these coalitions between different groups of minorities in the society, like feminists, cannabis activists, vegans, anarchists, our favorites, by the way, such strong supporters. You know, get all of these people together, and then you can see how church really won't have any kind of impact in the sense that church really will be a minority in this sense. So I think it has been a bit easier for us in this sense, yes.
So I got the main message. Don't be gay, be vegan.
Both.
Oh, both. You can be both. Very intersectional. So do we have any questions from the audience? We would like to hear from you. Okay, so is there some... Okay, thank you very much. So I guess what first question is there. Maybe we can take 2 or 3 and then do another round.
Thank you. First, for all the presenters, great presentations. But I have a question to my colleague from Estonia, fellow fighter.
I was expecting this.
So you started your presentation by saying that Estonia going from 0 to hero will reach 0.1%. At the end you said we are half the mountain there. So you have grown since you started, which is good, towards optimism. But looking at the situation, what do you think, looking back, should the Estonian gay community, should we have done something different over the years? What would have reached a different or better result today, or just a lesson for the others to learn? Is there something you would change? Of course, we cannot change the past, but it would be an example for the other countries what they could do. I totally agree with you what you said about the discontinuing the parades and actually turning it into a cultural event, which was the biggest success, I think, of Estonian gay community. But do you think there is some lesson to learn from our experience and what they could do now different? Thank you.
Thanks for asking this question. Yes, I think that we should have said no to the man from your party who came to us with the agreement to stop parades, because what we also stopped with the parades was building community. And so as a result, in 2014, we did not have a community anymore. So in this sense, yes, that's something that I would have done differently, and I think that a lot of countries should, if they feel it's necessary, focus on really building the ties within the community, making sure that you reach out to the community, and making sure that you provide the community also different possibilities to come out and have their say. That's something that I regret that we did wrongly, and we could have done it differently. Who knows where we would be today? Maybe we would be in the same place. I don't know. But yes, this is my big regret. And again, a good advice to everybody. Just make sure that you build your communities and make sure that your communities are interaction with other minority communities, because when you bring all the minorities together, majority appears.
I want to pick up one or two things there, and I think Lisette said something very interesting there, which is about a community. And I suppose it calls into question what the role of an advocacy group is. And all of us who are involved in advocacy groups, we're not representative of anybody except the group of people who turn up and are part of that group. And it's a really difficult challenge when you're campaigning for rights for at least a minority, but perhaps more, is that the vast majority of people who are going to benefit from any changes you can bring about will never know of you, don't know who you are, and will barely know that your organisation exists. And there's a real challenge as to what the role of the advocacy group becomes. Does it pay attention to the loudest voices who are activists and are deeply engaged in the issue, or does it try and take a broader view of actually how can we create gains for a majority of our population, whatever that population is? And it's a real challenge. And there isn't any easy answer, and there's very different answers in different countries. But like in an Irish example, because I'm just picking up on Lisette's point about the community. So civil partnership came along in Ireland. It was, we knew we could get every political party support, but every political party was now saying a referendum was needed for marriage. But every single other national LGBT organisation campaigned against civil partnership, and GLEN were the only ones campaigning for it. Them and regional organisations thought civil partnership was good. And it's a really interesting dilemma. It goes back to the point about pride and the decisions you make. And I would say the one thing we could have done better is try and communicate our decision out to lesbian and gay people around the country. However, we had tiny resources, and at the same time in Parliament, the Catholic Church-inspired right wing were actively campaigning against the bill. We had to put all our resources, which were very few, into campaigning for the bill. So we had no resources to go out to the community to try and explain what was happening. And I think those are the kind of realities of advocacy groups. And I think they're terribly difficult challenges. There's no easy answer.
I saw Linda's hand whenever one, and there was one there.
I have a question for each of you, but so I'll try to phrase myself short, and I hope you can answer shortly too. So Ryan, what was your strategy in your campaign when it comes to the Catholic Church? Did you try to make friends with them, or did you just ignore them? Or this is because for us it's also very interesting. Yeah, how. Then Gabi, why so many LGBT organizations? I mean, we are 4 times as many as you are. No, 5 times as many as you are. And we have one organization who's struggling to get people to volunteer for this one, So is this a good thing? Is it a bad thing? Are you working together, etc.? And Lisette, actually I got that offer once too, but it wasn't from our Grey Cardinals. It was for the leader of the No Pride organization. He said, if you stop marching, I'll make sure you get a partnership law. And my answer to him was, it doesn't matter what I promise you, because I'm not all the gay persons in the country, and I can't stop anyone else from start marching. So what was your thinking? What if somebody else had just decided to have a gay parade that year? Thanks.
You can proceed. Just try to be brief.
Okay. Why so many organizations? God, I don't know. Does it help? Sometimes, most times, not necessarily. There are organizations with sort of very different remits. So, for example, if you're talking about the LGBTI student group on campus, perfectly legitimate. Most countries have those. If Drachma and Drachma parents are LGBTI faith groups, one of LGBTI individuals and the other of parents of LGBTI people. So again, you know, in a way, completely different ethos. But then we have separate group for Gozo, which is kind of this. Malta has 2 inhabited islands at least. The main island, Malta, which has most of the population, and then the smaller island, which has a population of about 30,000, and they felt they needed to start their own separate group. My idea would probably have been, it would have been more strategic and to have them as sort of in a sense, a part of MGRM. That's not their choice. I can't oblige them to do anything else. So yes, we try and work together to support them. And again, ARC, which is another organization that's cropped up, is mainly focused on organizing community events. I think the problems arise when people don't really stick to their areas of expertise.
Nicely put.
So, you know, one of the misconceptions is because you're gay or LGBTIQ, then you know everything about LGBTIQ issues, which, you know, we all know is a fallacy. We didn't start off as experts. We became experts by, you know, investing in learning, by going to trainings, by developing our understanding, by meeting people, by from, you know, helping and listening to one story after another, picking out what the patterns are, what was reflective of an individual situation, but what was reflecting a more systemic societal problem. And this is not something you get overnight. So I think there is space for possibly more than one organization. In a sense, the Consultative Council is serving as a forum where at least we can thrash issues out amongst ourselves before they, you know, we put forward a proposal to the broader public. And then, you know, so that, in a sense, limits, I think, the damage that could be done. Some of these organizations might survive, some of them probably won't. But it's, you know, always a struggle to get people to work together. That's never going to change, I think. It was easier in the beginning to agree because, you know, the big issue is marriage equality. Nobody's going to argue against that within the community, you know. The Gender Identity Act was a bit more difficult, again, because, you know, people didn't necessarily understand the issues. Intersex issues were completely new for most of the people on the council. So, you know, it served as a learning process also for these people. But, yeah. And the other issue is now that, you know, money, which is always short, has to be, in a sense, you know, divided among a broader group of people, which means that there's less to go around, in a sense. So that's another issue. We don't have the capacity of GLEN. We don't have full-timers. We have funding which manages to support part-time service provision and, you know, projects, mainly EU-funded from time to time on specific areas we want to engage with, but we don't have the capacity. We try to do what we do in a professional manner because most of us are professionals in our own fields. So, you know, we have social workers and we have youth workers and doctors and lawyers, etc. But we don't have the luxury of people working 40 hours a week in the organization. Well, yes. Well, I do 40 kind of unpaid, but...
So, Brian, your answer, just a reminder that we are terribly running out of time, so try to be straight on point.
The Catholic Church have done a very good job in Ireland of destroying their own moral authority without our help. But they have shock ground troops who are lay Catholic associations who have always opposed progress for LGBT people, disguised as care and love and affection, all that shite. In essence, we did two things. We asserted our values and what we stood for rather than took on their critique. And it's that, like, it's that tonal positive piece. So we would answer something. So they would say, the big argument came about families, children, surrogacy, and so on. And it was like, but all children should have their families protected is the best way. And I think Irish people would always want all children, or no child, to be penalised by virtue of the family they're born in. You know, those kind of arguments worked well. And I suppose the other one is that the Catholic Church is not a monolith anymore. So we did a massive social media campaigns, and we used quotes from priests and nuns who actually were going to vote yes. And they broke ranks. Now, bishops and parish priests and letters and publicity, and they're marvellous at all. They were our biggest opposition formally, but you can get over that by, you know, very devout Catholic people, parents, opening up and saying, actually, I'm going to vote yes. I think it's my moral and Christian thing to do. So we did a number of strategies, but their biggest enemy was certainly the organised Catholic Church and their lay Catholic organisations. But we've managed to overcome their objections at such a resounding way, but we still have to deal with them, you know, in schools particularly.
Lisette?
I'll make my answer very short. The reason why nobody else stepped up to make pride parades is because I persuaded them not to. Because we were promised, or the deal was that there will be a law by 2010. That was the deal. And so that's why nobody did that.
So I would love to take the other questions from the audience, but I don't want to be stealing time from Wiktor. So I encourage you to table your questions to my panelists on your private capacity. I would like to actually conclude that it has to be turned out a terribly nice panel discussion, so thank you very much for actively participating. And to conclude with, you know, being an activist is a challenging task. And not only know the challenges we go through on a daily basis, but you know, you hear about these success stories, and you are very happy for your colleagues and friends. But you always get this tiny, bitter, ugly feeling, which tells to you, why this is not happening to me? Why this is happening to others? And these kind of panels that we had today is actually wide opening, because you know, not only you have your own challenges, and other stories are not fairy tales. They include hard work and a lot of effort, and also good luck. So on this note, I have to remember that today is the 10th anniversary of our dear, dear friends MOZAÍKA. And on behalf of the National LGBT Rights Organization, LGL, from Lithuania, and also on behalf of my panelists, and also on behalf of myself personally, I have a little gift. So in the popular discourse, the elephant with the truck up means good luck. So we wish you good luck, that very soon Latvia would be one of the success stories. So thank you very much for bearing with us.
that's not you.
I know, I'm just... Oh, we don't need one, I guess. It's fine. Works, that's great. Thank you.
And now I would like to introduce Wiktor Dynarski from Poland, who will talk now about trans reality in the region.
Thank you so much, Christine. First of all, happy birthday to your organization. Well, now LGL really, let's say, screwed us over because we don't have a gift. But anyway, please, oh, thank you so much. But I do not consider myself a gift, so happy birthday and apologies that I didn't bring anything because I was told that Polish people are known for their courtesy, so I'm doing a very bad job being a stereotype right now. So I do apologize. So when I was actually asked by Christine to come to this conference, I was supposed to talk about trans rights and realities in regional perspectives. And to be honest, I think that there is much to. I'm pretty thankful for Gabi that she presented the situation in Malta, because based on Malta's example, you can see how much has changed so rapidly in terms of trans rights in such a small country, and it's absolutely amazing. Although I myself come from a country that has recently campaigned and worked on a new gender recognition law for the last 3 years between 2012 and 2015. And as you know, our efforts were actually paused by the Polish president who vetoed the law. So I come from a less positive perspective on change. I come from a perspective where although activists can do a lot and there could be a lot of great support coming from policymakers and also for society, it is not always that you can win, and it is not always that you can get what you want. And I think that's also an important perspective to have in terms of working for trans rights. So the presentation is about rights, although I will not tell you in detail what are trans rights or how trans rights are seen throughout Europe. That's mainly because there are two very professional organizations who already do that on a European level, and that's ILGA Europe and Transgender Europe. And they themselves have their yearly maps where they present the legal and also social a bit situation of trans and LGBTI people in general. So if you have the possibility, please visit their websites where you can see the exact index and the exact map of what is currently happening in terms of legal issues. What I mean by social change, like I said, I come from a context where we thought social change is possible, but we also see that change is not always positive. I mean, with the Central and Central Eastern European region, that is my expertise. I do work in Central Eastern Europe mostly. We see that change can be both positive and negative. And as Greg Czarnecki has pointed out in the morning, that some activists in our region were very surprised what happened with Poland in terms of election results. I have to say, I would be also part of that group that was surprised, but maybe not to the extent of, oh no, this isn't happening. More to the extent, why is this happening so fast? And what could we do to stop it? So I think in terms of change, we as activists and we as the general public, we should be aware that sometimes what we think can take years actually takes a few months in terms of positive things like Ireland or Malta, but also it can go to the other side, saying, oh no, like this one good result of a right-wing organization, that is nothing. This one right-wing party will not win, and then surprisingly, they do, and that is the context of my country where I currently live, where after the presidential elections, we thought, okay, the president is from a right-wing party, that's fine, we're going to do it, we're going to try to do something in terms of general elections. Well, now we have a ruling party that is completely right-wing with the possibility to do whatever they want in terms of law, and that is something that we did not see coming. We thought that they may have a lot of votes, but not the majority. So I think it's important to realize that these perspectives can change very rapidly, and also that change is happening constantly. So for activists, even though we may have full coverage of rights, we may have full equality, it doesn't mean that we have to stop working, because something can change in just a matter of days, months, weeks, etc. I think this is very visible in terms of how in Central and Eastern Europe, and also in the West, how currently racist movements, national movements, and basically anti-equality movements have risen throughout the last 3 to 5 years. So in terms of realities in our region, I think what is extremely important is visibility. And in my presentation, you see examples of 2 recent campaigns that were campaigns on trans issues. One is the Lithuanian campaign trans_LT, or hashtag trans_LT. And I have spoken to Tomas, who is an expert in that, because this is LGL's work. So if you are interested in that campaign, please talk to... I know. But, you know, we have to promote your work. I mean, this is your work in this region. I mean, it's very important. And I spoke to Tomas before this presentation, and he told me that this campaign gained 30,000 views on YouTube in just a matter of days in terms of the video that was posted to it. And also, it was able to get some policymakers on board. It was able to influence the political aspect of what is currently happening in terms of legal gender recognition in Lithuania. And I think that's important to underline, that things like this are happening. And the other campaign that you see below is the campaign on a hashtag no to trans veto, which was a very short 1-week cry for help, basically, if I could say it like that. It was after the Polish president vetoed the Gender Accordance Act, which was supposed to be the new legal gender recognition legislation in Poland. And with that particular campaign, what we wanted to do is we wanted for the world to see what was happening. We actually didn't feel like this campaign could influence any policymakers, as it seemed that after the veto, political parties decided to just let it go. Apologies for Disney reference. What happened with the law in our case was that after the veto, political alliances broke down, and I think it's also interesting in terms of what Lisette was talking about when Lisette was talking about Estonia. With Estonia, there was something promised that wasn't delivered, and it was very similar to what has happened in Poland. We worked for the new law 3 years with the government, and we have seen difficulties. We have seen people opposing, but after 2.5 years, so that's 6 months before everything broke down, we sat together and the government said, okay, we're doing this with us, we're going to vote on it. There's going to be some backlash in the Senate, we were aware of that, but whatever the Senate does, we're voted down, it's going to go to the president. But what happened within the 6 months that I'm talking about was the fact that the presidential elections were coming. And in one case, there was supposed to be one meeting of the special subcommittee working on that law, and that particular meeting was postponed by 3 weeks. The exactly 3 weeks that we needed to have the previous president sign the law. So what we have realized is that we were part of a strategy, part of an equality, or let's say a cynical equality strategy, showing us that the government will work on it, the parliament will vote on it, and it will be fine, but then we would have to be confronted by the conservative president, and that was the plan of the party that was taking us through all the steps. So our interest became also a part of, well, actually a pawn in the game of different political movements. And I think it's important to underline that, and it's important to be aware, and I'm very happy that Lisette mentioned it, that even though you have policymakers on board, there is still a matter of distrust. And when somebody promises something to you in politics, that is not a promise that's being kept usually, or you have to be very, very vigilant about that promise and remember that you still need to trust the people who you work with on your daily basis and who come from your teams, basically, that you can trust. And for this presentation, what I did also was I will try to give you a general overview of what is happening in terms of trans rights in Europe and in our region, and I divided it to a few work areas, as I like to call them. And mind you, what I will do is I will tell you what are different issues in terms of trans rights and access to rights, access to social justice, and then maybe try to think of how to work with these issues, how to change what is currently happening, what to do to make it better. And as you will see, some of these tips or guidelines or tools will be very general, and you would just say, well, that ain't happening in my context. Well, I would just like to tell you that in some instances, a lot of them would not work in my context as well. But I would like to show you what worked in different countries and different aspects. And so these work areas are legal gender recognition, which is a huge topic, and I know it's currently very, very popular with the work on democracy in Europe. And I would just like to ask the person who is at the computer, can I take the other microphone and stand up? Is that fine? Thank you. Thank you, that's better. I need to see the screen. I just realized that I don't from here, excuse me. Yeah, so legal gender recognition, that is a subject that's known to you, and that's basically everything that surrounds legal aspects of having one's gender recognized. Then we have health, reproductive and sexual rights, something that it's debated on trans issues, but still maybe not from a reproductive and sexual rights perspective as much as I personally would want it to. We have family and relationships, and that is linked to marriage equality, but also linked to other aspects of being a trans person and the parent. Employment and protection from discrimination, so that is something that's very important in terms of economic rights of trans people and access to goods and services, resources, and possible poverty issues. And violence, hate crime, and hate speech. And I also put rise of extremism in that topic, because that is something that is I find it very important in our region. I find it absolutely on the rise right now, and I think we should, as a region, also as Europe, think about how to tackle this issue, how to work with it. I titled this part of the presentation "Concerns," and concerns for me means what is difficult in terms of trans issues, what is still to be done, where are problems, where Europe has problems. Like, I like to see Europe as a person who has a lot of issues, and Europe needs help to fix their problems. Europe is a non-binary for me, so I use they for Europe. Well, Europe has issues in terms of legal gender recognition, in a sense that it creates, in a lot of countries, the legal gender recognition is a difficult, complicated process. Where I come from, this is a court case between a person and their parents. So when I did my process, I had to see my parents in a court of law, and which was pretty interesting for us because we're a loving family and we met in court, but not everyone has the privilege of having supportive parents. So when you have to confront your parents in a court case, that is not exactly the thing that you would like to do to be recognized in the gender that you want to be recognized in. In many countries, we have too many prerequisites, so conditions that you need to follow in order to get your legal recognition, and that could be diagnosis, so there's a lot of medical aspects. There are countries where forced sterilization is used as a prerequisite for legal gender recognition, so without being sterilized or even castrated. I am not afraid of using the word castration, because in some countries it is castration, because there are medical differences between sterilization and castration. In some countries, that is the final and the most important prerequisite to be recognized in one's gender. And also, in some countries, there is no legal recognition at all, and still countries need to fight for it. What is also a problem is that in some countries, the gender recognition procedures rely heavily on third parties. So that is healthcare providers, that is someone's parents, that are other parties. In Poland, for example, the recent High Court ruling says that children have to be part of the process as well. So basically, your gender recognition is your family's history. which is not the kind of family protection we would like to see in Europe. There's also procedural mess, and when I see procedural mess, I don't mean that it's not coded in the law or that the law is insufficient, but also even if it's coded in the law, and that connects to the last point, sometimes clerks and judges or whoever deals with these problems, they have no idea what to do. And that is a problem that's being faced, for example, by trans people in Slovakia, where there's a clear information in terms of administrative issues, what to do when someone presents documents that prove that they have gone through sterilization procedures, yet still trans people have to go with the text of that law to the clerk's office and just educate clerks what needs to be done with the documentation, and that is not right. That is not something that needs to be done. So there also needs to be a shift in focus in terms of who's responsible for this particular process, and that trans people need to be clients in that case and not people who need to do personal advocacy just because they want to have their documents changed. In some countries, we also have forced divorce. I mean, actually, in most of the countries, I would say, in Europe. So that's a procedure that says if you are married or in a civil partnership, as is the case of Czech Republic, you need to end that relationship, that legal relationship with another person before you have your gender recognized. So this is something that my organization and I myself see as breaking up families and see something that is against families, politics against families. And also another issue is that in most countries, legal gender recognition, so only the legal aspect, is not accessible to minors or youth, which is something that's extremely important right now. And more trans kids and trans teenagers are actually stepping up and talking about their own issues and about their own rights. And in terms of what to do to make this better, the Council of Europe committee recommendations say that gender recognition should be quick, transparent, and accessible. That is something that Yuri mentioned in his presentation. And that means that, first of all, it has to be done in less than 3 months. Because if you go then more than 3 months, that's a proposition that's not in the recommendations. If you go longer without your new data, you basically open yourself to a lot of different legal situations, difficult legal situations that may be a problem in your life. And the law should recognize that you have the right to be the person who you want to be, and you have the right to not deal with procedural issues just because the law is not ready to recognize your identity. In terms of legal procedure, there is a preference of it being administrative and only between the applicant and the state. And that is also something important in terms of legal aspects, because there are countries where actually administrative means takes more time. So sometimes it is actually better to have it in a court of law or through different means, but what needs to be remembered is that it has to be quick and transparent and accessible, as it states in the recommendations. Like I said, accessible to transgender youth and children. There is a strict human rights approach to medical interventions, and it says that no medical interventions should be part of the legal process, whether it's surgery, hormonal therapy, where it's diagnosis, there should be none of it. Diagnosis and any part of medical aspects are part of the medical process, and medical process should not be linked to legal process. That should be the case. Another issue is the marriage and parenthood. They shouldn't be affected by legal proceedings, and I will talk about it later when I go to family and relationships. But there is, we see a trend where trans people, for example, are in this region afraid of going through legal gender recognition because they're afraid of losing their parental rights, especially when children are below 18 years old. So in some cases, I've met people in Poland, Slovakia, and even in Czech Republic who decided to not go through this process until their children are 18, and I've met a person whose child is 3 right now. So they're looking into 15 more years of living in their, well, the legal gender that they have right now, and they're not even trying to medically transition right now because they're thinking about their children and the safety of them. Another aspect is obviously the education of administrative and judicial staff on the matter, and this links to what I have described as the lack of knowledge in terms of accessibility. And something that is in a couple, I see this left out on some of the discussions on legal gender recognition, but I also and my organization strongly support equal and unrestricted access to proceeding. proceedings, and that includes economic access, which means you shouldn't be forced to pay money to go through a process that is basically a legal process. And when it comes to health, reproductive, and sexual rights, and I'll see how whether I'm well on time or not. Well, not that great, but we'll see. I'll try to go as fast as I can. And I know I'm also keeping you from lunch, so I bet you're just dying to eat something, and I'm just talking here not about these things. Anyway, in terms of health, reproductive, and sexual rights, the concerns are, well, first of all, accessibility of transition-related and trans-specific healthcare. So there's the constant problem of who pays for transitions, who is responsible for denying a trans person the right for healthcare matters, etc. We have the problem of accessibility of reproductive and sexual care. So trans people have a problem of getting the care that they need in terms of IVF, which is in vitro fertilization, in terms of learning about their bodies and learning about contraception, learning about their sexual health. That is an issue that we see. Definitely, healthcare providers do not have the sufficient knowledge on these issues, and they very often promote myths and stereotypes on these aspects. Although, to be fair, in the context that I work, a lot of healthcare providers don't have even general knowledge on STIs, which is sexually transmitted infection. So that also leads into worse treatment of trans people. There is definitely transphobia and lack of trans sensitivity in healthcare. There are currently, thanks to ILGA Europe's Documentation Advocacy Fund, there are resources available on the situation of trans people in healthcare in countries of Central and Eastern Europe, and it doesn't look good, especially in terms of transphobia and even barring people from getting different services. So even a person who wants to, for example, go for a checkup could be stopped on the way and said, well, I'm sorry, but this is not accessible to you because we don't know what to do with you. That's a story actually from one of the researchers where a trans man wanted to get medical help that was associated with the common cold, which was getting very bad. And before that person, they confronted their physician and said, well, I'm also a trans person, just for your information. And then the doctor said, well, I cannot treat you. I don't know how to do this. And the person says, well, I have a cold. You know, I have some pain here and maybe some headache. I would like to get some antibiotics maybe or something different. And the healthcare provider says, no, I do not know what to do with you. Which is basically a situation, I know it sounds absurd, but it is documented. It's something that actually happens and happened and happens in this particular region. Last thing is that transsexual diagnosis, and in most cases, trans people will still be diagnosed as transsexual before they go through legal gender recognition. It's grounded in old and outdated standards of care and very often requires people to submit to a number of different stereotypes concerning gender, including gender expression, the way you dress, the way you think, and the way you talk about yourself. That is something that's also visible. And how to change it, and that's where we go to this very general, change policies, etc. Kind of approach. But I think what is important in that aspect, it's especially updating standards of care in terms of transsexual diagnosis or diagnosis in general, or helping trans people with their medical transition. There's an organization called the World Professional Association for Transgender Health, and they issue standards of care every couple of years that are updated to what is currently happening in terms of trans issues and trans rights. And well, I think this region could actually benefit from that, and if healthcare providers would be willing to work on these standards of care, we would have a better situation, definitely. I think what also needs to be underlined that there is a difficulty in accessing or in talking to healthcare providers in general in terms of trans issues, because what I've been observing in these countries is that healthcare providers tend to stick together and tend to have this approach that they are the experts and they don't need any external activists like people to tell them what to do. So in terms of how to work on trans issues, there's definitely an issue of the gatekeeping and to be able to talk to these providers. In terms of family and relationships, okay, good, very good. I think in terms of what we see in Europe, and that's especially that Europe is apparently getting friendlier in terms of marriage equality, especially in the West, although not maybe that much in the East or in the central parts. But we see that in some countries, and that's the case of the UK, even though marriage equality was enacted, there was something that was called the spousal veto, which is a practice that bars a trans person from transition until their spouse consents. So if you're married and your spouse says, well, you cannot legally transition, they have to go through a divorce first, and then the person needs to transition. And our approach to that issue is that if there is no if there's an argument about someone's transition, the person should be able to transition legally, and divorce proceeding could be happening at the same time. There is no need to bar a trans person from legal change just because there is no consent from their spouse. Like the spouse basically shouldn't have a say in terms of what the person wants to do with their legal status. And we also see that in countries like Czech Republic or others, there is the problem. That is actually something that's considered a success to some extent, which is transposition of marriage to civil partnership. So if you have civil partnership, your marriage can be then changed to a civil partnership when you transition if you want to stay with your spouse. But the question is whether that's okay. Well, to me, that's not equality. If somebody is married, they should have the right to have that marriage recognized the same way, even though they themselves or their spouse change their legal status. In terms of, we also have forced sterilization and castration that I talked about, which bars trans people from becoming parents, and research shows that more and more trans people want to become parents after they transition legally. So that is not something that's not happening, that's not theoretical, and we have cases of this. There's definitely discrimination in access to adoption services and in vitro fertilization, assisted reproduction. That is something that I have worked with in Poland in terms of adoption rights, where when a trans person who wanted to be an adoptive parent shared the fact that they are post-transition, they have received a letter saying that this will not be, that this could be a threat to the child, in the understanding that the child's gender identity may be affected by having a trans adoptive parent. So basically, trans people are supposed to be confusing children by the very fact of their existence. Yeah. Like I said, there is the danger of losing parental rights, and that is something, in the context that I worked in, I didn't meet anyone who would have this issue in terms of they lost parental rights, but there's definitely an amount of fear that goes around trans communities. And people have been saying that they want to do this just in case, and they're not interested in any type of legal analysis, whether that's actually possible or not. They will just be with their children until they turn 18. Another aspect of is the problematic recognition of trans people as parents. So as you can imagine, when somebody transitions legally and changes their status, in some countries there different family laws define parents differently. So in the countries that I've worked in, a mother is defined as the woman who gave birth to the infant, the baby, which means that a trans woman could not be then registered as a mother because she didn't give birth to that baby. At the same time, for example, in Poland, there is no law on, like, there's no actually legal article that would say who's the father. What is being said is, this is the mother, the woman who gave birth to the baby, and the father is the person she says is the father. So basically, when you are a man who gave birth to his child, there is no legal space for you. There is no possibility to register you. And we in Poland have worked on a case like this. And what happened, and I think that's an interesting example, what happened in Poland is that there is a provision in Poland what to do when the father is unknown. What happens is the child is registered with the mother's name in the mother's section, and then the father is one of the three most popular names, like first names and last names, and that's just being chosen by, I don't know, maybe somebody throws dice, I don't know, maybe they just like put it in the hat and just choose. But that's the situation. So in the case of a trans man whom we've helped in terms of legal recognition of him as a father, they did exactly that, but the other way around. So he was wrote in as the father, and the mother of the child was one of the 3 most popular names and last names in Poland. So, so basically, his child has a mother that doesn't exist legally. So as you can see, there are a lot of different procedures that could be happening and a lot of different, oh, that's me. This means I'm overtime. Can I be overtime? Okay. I timed myself and I didn't do a very good job. I'm sorry. I'm going to talk about this with myself later. In front of the mirror, I'm going to scold myself. So in terms of how to move forward, obviously recognize trans people as potential parents, we move forward for practice, like do everything that you can that trans people are recognized as parents. And I think what is most important is first, like, end the legal punishment with transposition of relationships, because I see this as legal punishment. When you decide to change your status and your marriage becomes civil partnerships, that is not all right in terms of what you want to do. Very quickly, in terms of employment and protection from discrimination, there's definitely discrimination in the workplace. We see reports about this. We see it happening. What is, I think, interesting is the lack of work history due to transition. So in some countries, you would not have laws that would force employers to issue the person's employment history with their new name and their new gender marker, their new data, basically. So what it means is somebody who could be left without a resume. Let's say you transition when you're 40, you've been working for the last 20 years, there's no law that would force your employees who don't want to do this, it means that you're 40 and you have no work history. What do you do then? And this contributes to danger of impoverishment and homelessness of trans people, definitely, in this particular aspect. Although, obviously, homelessness and poverty is also linked to lack of acceptance coming from family in general, lack of support, especially in this region. There is also, obviously, the problems that trans people face in employment are not seen as something that is part of any type of country strategy, especially here. And I especially work in Poland, so I see this happening. And although we have European Court of Human Rights rulings on pension rights, there are still some countries where there is a threat of losing pension rights when you transition, in terms of, especially if there is no pension equality in that aspect. Obviously, how to move forward is to, well, change all of this and secure people's rights to non-discrimination. But I think in that aspect, the most important part would be recognize gender identity and gender expression as possible discrimination grounds, because without that, trans people cannot get their cases of discrimination to courts. They cannot be the people fighting for their rights as well. I think one of my organizations were actually legal or battle is to ensure that medical transition is financed by the state, as I come from a country where this is not happening. And I think this will also secure trans people's employment, because what we also see in this region is that when medical transition is not financed by the state, it means that people will devote most of their rights to earn money for that transition, which then, when they do this, they will end up also without any strategic work history. So you take all the jobs that you can to gather the money, you pay for your medical needs, and then what happens with your life? Well, that's when issues start. So that's definitely something that Europe needs to be aware of. And violence, hate crime, hate speech, and rise of extremism. I will just, what I think I would like to underline here is violence in Europe is prevalent and protection from it's scarce. And even if we have policies that protect trans people based on their gender identity or expression, we still have a lot of problem in terms of how this is used and how this is changing or not changing, actually. Violence is also based on multiple grounds, so trans people are not just affected as trans people, they're also affected as trans people of color, trans people of different religious backgrounds. Right now, Muslim trans women are in grave danger of violence in Europe, and definitely trans people of refugee trans people and migrant trans people. That is something that definitely Europe is having an issue with. Definitely unsafe environment for trans people due to right-wing extremism on the rise in the whole region, but especially in Central and Eastern Europe, as we see not only a rise of neo-Nazi, Nazi, fascist parties, but also right-wing organizations that are violent who come to power and who are in parliament. So we see not only violence in general, but also change of discourse surrounding violence. I don't know if that is, I don't know if that is something that's happening, especially in Latvia, but what I see in Poland and Slovakia, and also a bit of Czech Republic, but I think these two countries will be better to compare, is that violence, especially hate speech, has become part of parliamentary work. So you see that happening from in parliamentary debates and discussions. You see hate speech being transmitted through media, and you see not enough reactions to it and not enough people saying, well, that's not right. And we see that when it starts from speech, then goes to violence on the street. So it's very important to have that in mind and to work against it. And another issue is that governments are not interested in policies helping to reduce the issue, and I think that's something that needs to be said openly and in a forum like this. Trans people are seen as problematic. Trans people are seen as an agenda rather than people who have issue, who actually are experiencing problems and who are experiencing violence. So that's something that really needs to be changed in terms of government authorities. And I think what is the most important here is like the general disregard of trans people's safety. And we see that trans people are not seen as a group that should be ensured safety. And very often the stories of trans people say, well, why would you dress like this? Why would you wear something like this? Aren't you? So we see a lot of victim blaming, which is very similar to the struggles of cisgender women in our society. And as you may imagine, that also needs to be changed. And I think here, this is I think the most difficult part of this presentation. That's one of the last ones. That's because this is a topic that's absolutely difficult to approach. That's a topic where it is the most difficult to actually have governments recognize the issue, especially in the context that I work with. And in some cases, the only thing that can be done is by NGOs such as you who are here and us working in our country to establish violence monitoring mechanisms and hope that reporting on this will bring change, and also at the same time supporting trans people throughout the struggles and supporting them when things happen and when things go badly, because, and that is also important to mention, especially in the context of our recent work on advocacy, sometimes the only thing you can do is to be supportive to the community, but sometimes that is also the most important thing you can do. And I wouldn't shy away from support work because it's also important, especially when you know that you cannot change much. And to conclude, and thank you for agreeing for me to go over time, I think in terms of what this region needs and what needs to be said at the end is that, last thing is that there is no struggle for our rights if we're not there to lead it. So there is no struggle for trans rights without trans people, and even though there are many issues, please remember that we have all the right to be there when you talk about our rights, and we have all the rights to be part of the conversation about the whole LGBT movement and not just about our rights. So nothing about us without us. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your presentation. There's a lot to think about, a lot to take on board. So we'll break for lunch now, and we come back at, who has the agenda at hand? At 2 o'clock. Thank you very much.